I want to take some time today to talk about letting go of feeling bad about feeling bad. I want to talk about this idea of when a negative or challenging feeling tone or emotion comes up, sort of like a strong feeling that's quite difficult to handle rises up in our experience. Instead of just sitting with it or allowing it to flow through our experience naturally, not judging it with or labeling it as a good thing or a bad thing, instead of just doing that, what can tend to happen is a feeling or emotion will come up that challenges us. And then before we've even really been able to register it, there's like maybe a couple, could even be a whole stack of corresponding feelings can arise. Feelings like guilt, shame, fear, anxiety. Sometimes even just like a sense of self-anger or frustration, like as if the feeling that you're having is not welcome right now in your energy field because it's going to take up time that you could be using to do something better. I think that's very common, particularly in the personal development space, interestingly enough. There's this idea that instead of allowing the actual feeling to be there, what we're going to do is we're going to fight against it. And this can sometimes be done consciously. Sometimes it's like I said, in the case of anger or frustration with ourselves for feeling something, and maybe we're just going to work harder in order to keep the feeling at bay or keep ourselves busy to not face up to the feeling. That can be there. But then sometimes this can happen almost completely unconsciously. It's like difficult feeling tones can come up and there's such a strong feeling of guilt or shame or anxiety around the fact that we just feel negative to begin with that we honestly have no idea what to do with it. And so we never really end up facing the initial feeling tone itself. We never actually end up getting in touch with what that feeling is trying to communicate to us. I think one of the main reasons a lot of us struggle so much with being in touch with a difficult feeling, a negative emotion that comes up, is that a lot of us grow up without developing a sense of core safety. We don't grow up with a tacit sense inside of us that it's okay to experience challenging emotions. Like, for example, maybe when we were younger, we had negative experiences come up. We experienced frustration. We experienced loneliness, sadness, wantingness, all kind of natural experiences for us to have when we're younger, and just throughout life in general, to be honest. But maybe when we were younger, those feeling tones and those emotions were expressed, and then our caregivers, our parents, met those emotions with a sense of shaming us. Maybe they didn't necessarily do it consciously, but there can be a sense of sometimes being shamed or guilted for experiencing those things. Sometimes you could experience those emotions earlier on and just be met with an explanation around how a good boy or a good girl doesn't get upset. Or you can't be upset right now. Or maybe it was even worse. Maybe you're getting upset triggered something unresolved in your caregiver, and maybe they actually lashed out at you. It's just a classic case of projection. Maybe they actually saw some pain come up in you and that triggered their pain body. And then they screamed at you. Maybe they shouted in your face. Maybe they told you, you have nothing to be upset about. You have no reason to be upset. I do everything for you. This is actually a really direct case of how trauma can develop, right? It's emotions or feelings coming up, and instead of them being able to naturally move through and circulate through the energetic system as it's designed to handle, these blockages can occur. And then there can be a kind of covert contract that we make with ourselves where it's like, okay, I'm not allowed to feel this clearly. I'm not allowed to sit and have the experience of fear, of difficulty. I'm not allowed to feel doubt in this way. I'm not allowed to feel sadness. Sometimes it can be done consciously, but most of the time I think this lack of core safety around emotions, so we could call it sort of a lack of emotional safety, I think it develops earlier on. I think it's not conscious. I think that it just tends to happen because we don't really have a very conducive, healthy space to feel what we need to feel and to experience what we need to experience. Anyway, the way this tends to present later on in our character is, let's say we're just having a day where we're feeling kind of off, and nothing we do, no work that we do, talking to our friends, maybe even eating a whole box of biscuits or whatever it is, watching our favorite TV show, none of the regular methods of suppression or distraction that we usually utilize are working for us, and we're just sort of stuck with this feeling, and we start to feel a sense of, like I said, it can be guilt or shame or anxiety or panic, or as if there's like something wrong with us, and we just need to do something to get rid of this feeling. And there can often be a sense of turning in on ourselves, like, we're not meant to feel like this. This is wrong. And I really want to highlight that sense of sort of something seeming wrong. It's this complete non-acceptance of what's actually occurring right now emotionally. If you can resonate with that, or if you've seen this in someone else around you. And it can be really challenging and really frustrating to be in this position, because instead of actually being able to get in touch with the feeling and allow it to move through naturally, what we keep responding and reacting to is all of the consequent feelings around it. And what we can sometimes go a whole lifetime without never being taught to do is just to be able to stop and completely just give up on fighting, give up on resisting these feeling tones as they come up. And what that might look like with this sort of metastization of different feelings, like for example, you have a negative feeling, but then there's maybe you're feeling a lot of guilt or shame or anger around it. It looks like actually just sitting down and asking the question, what is the feeling right now that I'm trying to avoid? What is the experience right now that I'm trying to avoid? And then if we ask that earnestly, usually what will happen is the emotion that's closest to the surface will present itself right through. It's already presenting itself, but we're not quite in touch with it because we're trying to sort of force or avert our gaze away from it. We're trying to avert our consciousness away from the feeling or the emotion. When we give up on doing that and we just face up to that initial feeling, and again, we don't judge it in any way. We're not labeling it good or bad. We're just sitting there and being with it and allowing it to flood through and flow through our experience naturally. What's an interesting thing there is that this feeling or this emotion just sort of stops being something bad. Like, you don't experience it as good or bad, but it's just something that's moving through your experience. And there's an interesting phenomena of intimacy and closeness with your own experience that occurs when you stop fighting your own feelings. It's like somehow you became more honest. You know, like when you tell someone something that you've been holding inside and you haven't been able to communicate it to them. And then when you finally do, there's sort of like a relief. There's a weight that comes off of your chest when you're able to communicate the truth about something. It's like that, but to do with yourself. It's like you come in touch with the feeling and you come in touch with the truth of it. And there's just kind of just knowingness that this is the right thing to be with this emotion, even though it's an emotion that's challenging you a lot at the time. When that emotion is experienced fully and there's no resistance around it, it tends to just dissipate of its own accord. It might take a couple of minutes, might even take half an hour. It might be something that's you have to let go of gradually in pieces. Like, for example, you might have a strong feeling of guilt and you might have to segment those feelings of guilt and let go of each individual part of it piece by piece. Like, for example, you might notice there's a sense of guilt that relates to other people around me need me right now, so I'm not allowed to feel this. So when you come in touch with that feeling, the sort of the guilt around having the guilt, you start to let go of that aspect of it. And then maybe after that you notice, it's actually, that's okay. So I've let go of that aspect. But now it's more of a sense of like, I feel like I'm too privileged to have this sense of guilt and that other people are going through something worse. So when you let go of resisting that sort of evens out more. And then after you do this a few times, depending on how much stuff's around the guilt, you come in contact with the actual energy field of guilt itself. And when you're in that state of guilt, it's the same thing. You're just being with it long enough. And sometimes you don't even notice it happen. It's not like it just disappears all of a sudden, but instead of actually feeling like you're in a fight, it's almost like with that surrender, you naturally go into a state of relief. It's like you feel like you've just dropped this kind of, you've dropped this thing that you've been holding on to. You go into this state of relief, and there's this kind of evening out. Sometimes for me, when I let go of really difficult emotions, I actually get quite a strong physiological response, like an endorphin rush. Like I'll get a sort of a cool chill or something like that, or maybe a warmth run through my body, or a sense of peace or relaxation in the energetic space. And when we have let go of that, then we can maybe get in touch with just what it actually is that's making us feel bad in that day or that time to begin with. And what's interesting is from a state of relief, we're able to reach down consciously into sort of like a negative feeling and allow it. And all we're doing is we're just contacting the feeling and allowing it to be there. We can do that consciously. So like I said, after we've let go of the guilt I used in that example, it could be anxiety or fear or shame or anger or anything else, any of these more dense, challenging feeling tones and emotions. Once we've let go of that, and there's just this sort of sense of relief and equanimity that comes with not fighting, that place of relief becomes a really conducive ground for us to reach down into another feeling tone. So for example, we might be avoiding a feeling of fear about our job situation that's kind of been buried, but now there's this sense of relief. It's a conducive space to kind of bring that up. Maybe we're like, why am I actually feeling that? Sometimes I actually just like to take time to write it down. And I'll just sort of write down, why actually am I feeling this sort of sense of challenge or fear around this job situation right now? And instead of looking at all of the details and how I'm going to manipulate them and change them, I'll just sort of take full accountability and go inward and focus on the feeling associated with that thing. So for example, if I feel like, the nature of the business is changing, and that might mean that I get laid off. But then I actually just, instead of looking at all the contingency plan, which is still good to do, but another thing, instead of looking at the whole contingency plan about what I'm going to do about it, I might just focus on, why am I so what is the feeling about losing a job? And then there'll be other stuff that sort of comes up like that. And what we learn over time is we learn to develop our own sovereign sense of dynamically working with different feeling tones as they come up. There's kind of this dynamism that comes in being able to just naturally sink into a place of surrender and work with difficult feelings. And what this engenders over time, I'm going to make another video about this topic here soon, but what this engenders over time, it engenders in us a sense of not being afraid of how we feel. And this can lessen a lot of the vulnerability in us and make it a lot easier just to kind of go through everyday life, interestingly enough, because we're not actually afraid of how we're going to feel about a situation. We're not so bothered by situations because we come to learn over time that it's not really the situation itself that's phasing us or that's bothering us, but it's how we feel about the situation. It's not the person, it's how we feel about the person. It's not the going home and not really having anything to do tonight that scares us. It's how we feel about not having anything to do. It's the associations that we have with that. And when we learn that it's safe to experience these things on a day-to-day basis, we don't have to fight them as much, and we can move through them. And feeling bad about feeling bad becomes a thing of the past when we learn to accept emotions and feeling tones as they come up. And this can also begin to sort of give us that sense of core safety. We start providing ourselves with the sense of core safety that we maybe didn't have earlier on, like I mentioned earlier in the video. If we didn't have that sense that it's okay to experience feelings and emotions as they come up, challenging ones and positive ones, I'm going to make other videos in the future as well about positive emotions and letting go of resistance to positive emotions, because that can be a problem in itself. I've experienced that a lot, actually. We can start to engender a sense of core safety and the ability to work with emotions as they come up. We develop the ability to feel okay with our feelings, maybe in a way that we didn't naturally get given earlier on in life. And this creates a much stronger foundation with which to approach life with. And just also allows us the capacity to experience lighter, freer, more positive emotions, emotions of relief more commonly without resistance, when we're not holding on to and feeling bad about our actual our state. Our state can move through us a lot more natural, and this tends to equate to a more positive experience of life in general. So I hope you got value out of this. I hope you needed to hear this today. This is the direct intention I'm making with this video, is that whoever needs to hear this will hear this when they hear it. I hope you did get value out of it. If you did, I appreciate you subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and sharing this with anyone you feel like might get value out of it. I hope you're having a beautiful day, and I'll see you soon.